So I'm sure most people have already seen. I don't know about most people, but I'm sure a lot of people in our chat have already seen Krystal Ball's interview with RFK. It's making the rounds on all the leftist streams, and leftist Twitter. Everybody's commenting on it. People, for the most part, seem not too happy with Krystal, including a lot of the Breaking Points audience. Now, I don't know exactly who the Breaking Points audience is. Obviously, they have Sagar and Jetty on there, who's more of a conservative. And some of the comments, we'll look through the comments after we watch the interview, but a lot of the comments are saying things like, Sagar, you should start your own show and leave Krystal behind. And I don't agree with that. That's just like Republican, standard Republican people who don't like Krystal and like Sagar, because a lot of Sagar's positions are ridiculous and much worse than Krystal's. But a lot of people really see Krystal Ball as this progressive, anti-establishment figure. And for them, this was a huge letdown, including fans of Breaking Point's audience. They lost over 1,000 subscribers at this point from this. So a lot of people were disappointed. They felt like Krystal didn't give RFK a chance to speak. They felt like her critiques weren't well researched. They were more talking points. And honestly, the audience seemed like they felt disrespected. Like Krystal was just trying to tell them, dismiss RFK. His vaccine positions are bad. Trust me, I'm not going to explain how they're bad, but trust me on that. So their audience really turned on them. And, there's a lot of piling on from the left right now. And honestly, I think this is one video where I'm not going to just throw vitriol at Krystal Ball. She's hearing it from every corner of the left right now. I'm going to try and give my critiques of this interview in a more rational and constructive manner. But Carlos, if you want to go in on her, be my guest.
Well, I'm going to try to be as nuanced as possible, but one thing I noticed, I saw the interview, or at least part of it, I saw it yesterday, and it had been up, I think, for a day already. Um, and what's crazy is that this has felt like the thing that everyone on like left Twitter has been talking about since it came out. But if you look at the video, it has, at least as of yesterday, I might be terribly wrong. It has 175,000 views. I don't know where it's at now.
222,000. So
222.
not an incredible amount.
Not right, which it tells you how even like the biggest fish in this thing that we call the progressive left are extremely tiny. They're all in a very, very small pond when compared to the vast majority of Americans. There's 330 million Americans, of course, that includes like kids and stuff. But um, we're talking about debates that are central, and yet are perhaps being engaged by a very, 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 very small fraction of the American people. And then people have the gall to like have this purity fetish that that says if anyone from the left goes on like Tucker Carlson's late show, um, they should be condemned, when that's a show that was getting millions of views a night and it was the most watched show on cable news. So it's so extremely difficult for like progressive ideas to get out there, and any opportunity that we have to bring them to the fore, I think we should. But to get away from the weeds, um, yeah, I'm excited to react to this interview. I believe it was the clip where she was like really banging him on the vaccine issue. And one of the things I mentioned in our last conversation live on the issue of the vaccine is that I don't really think most like regular working class people really care as much as the news pundits are caring about the issue. And that's not to say that it's not like unimportant. Of course it is, but they don't like. I don't think the vast majority of Americans think it's the burn that the news anchors, whether from mainstream media or from places like Breaking Points or whatever, the burn that they think it is. Um,
Certainly not from the pro-vaccine side. From the vaccine, I'd say the community of vaccine skeptics and just people who are doing their own research and really looking into it. Those people find it pretty important,
right.
and it's a big deal for them. I don't think there's a lot of people who hear RFK is vaccine skeptical, and they're like, oh, write him off, the same way that these liberals kind of think. I just wanted to say, too, I think what you were saying earlier to summarize your point was that the left is paying so much attention to this interview with Krystal Ball and piling on, when it's maybe not as big as of an issue with the American populace as we're making it out to be. Was that kind of to summarize your first point there?
Yeah, and I don't mean that in the sense of we shouldn't be like reacting to it or something, or we shouldn't be talking about it. I think we should. But it's always important to keep the context of the fact that in a lot of these issues that we engage with, the masses are not there yet. So it's always important to to do the sort of thing that or engage in the sort of discourse which gets us to the vast majority of people as possible. Um, and I think with relationship to like the size of our project, this is something that kind of does that. We're engaging with a bigger audience in this sort of debate, but still within the context of like the whole United States. It's so very very small, and that's I think at least for me that's always something that's very grounding, and that at least reminds me of how much growth is left to be done.
For sure. All right, we can jump into the video now. I just want to respond to one quick comment. Somehow this all feels like a distraction. In many ways, I agree. And the way that the news media is using the vaccine is definitely just as a talking point and a distraction. But also, some of the things I want to point out, some of the things RFK is talking about, like the corporate capture of all of our public healthcare institutions, is totally true, right? And regardless of what you think about the efficacy of the vaccine or vaccine mandates, the way that these public institutions and big pharma handled the pandemic was largely 99% of their decisions were made based on what's going to make us the most money. Because that's how capitalism works, right? We understand this as Marxists, that their incentive is going to be surplus value. And then the state becomes a dictatorship of capital. So it becomes controlled by these pharmaceutical companies. So on that level, I don't think it's a distraction. I think it's important. And that's why I did a Marxist analysis of American healthcare for the Journal of American Socialist Studies. And, I do think Krystal's mindset in this interview, just shutting down discussion, is harmful. So I think it's important, but also used as a distraction.
Right. And just maybe a quick point so that we
Yeah,
can
go ahead.
actually get to the video. But what's often lost sight of in the sort of jerk reaction of the left in calling people anti-science when they question, the vaccine mandates or the whole discourse that's coming from mainstream media, specifically the liberal wing, which is rooted, of course, in the people that are funding those mainstream media channels, which is big pharma, the medical pharmaceutical industrial complex. What's left out is that skepticism of science, which they characterize as anti-science, it's actually a skepticism of the way that big corporations, these pharmaceutical monopolies, don't have the best interest of the population at heart. What they care about is profit, their own profits, and they lobby politicians and the media to be able to secure that for-profit interest which drives them and facilitate the acquisition and accumulation of more and more profits. So at its core, the skepticism is radical. It's a very anti-establishment, even anti-capitalist skepticism, even if their false consciousness makes them word who it is that is doing this as like the communist or, whatever other weird thing that they call it. If you analyze like objectively what it is that's driving this, is definitely a sentiment that it's very easy to get and re-articulate towards like an anti-capitalist, socialist, Marxist critique of the existing state of affairs, and that's usually left out. And I saw like someone comment on one of the posts that was being shared around in this whole debacle of the interview with RFK about asking RFK Jr. about the Cuban vaccines, which have been proven to be effective and which they've basically vaccinated, I think, 99% of their population. There's no skepticism in Cuba from the population, and they didn't have to like do a mandate or anything like that. because the people understand that the goal of medicine is to treat people, and to prevent sicknesses in the first place. Whereas they know from very concrete examples, such as the opioid epidemics, which is caused by this whole medical pharmaceutical industrial complex, which you've shown very astutely in your paper for the second issue of Jazz, and I piggyback on that in a paper I have coming out in Cuba. They know from that experience. Most Americans have someone in their family that's affected by opioids, and that have a drug addiction that has been basically promoted by this merger of the interests of these medical pharmaceutical monopolies, schools, NGOs, and the government. That has been extremely profitable, and really, basically, no one has been held accountable. And the people who have, it's been basically a slap on the wrist. So they are very much not absurd when they're skeptical about big pharma and vaccines and all these different things, and just slapping them with the label of anti-science completely defeats the purpose of what communists should be doing, which is taking the embryonic, progressive, and radical ideas in the masses' common sense and taking those towards socialism. You know, if you call someone anti-science, how the hell are you supposed to organize them for socialism or bringing them into a party? No one wants to be fucking anti-science. So again, these are just the approaches that the left has, I think, grounded on the purity fetish and other ideological flaws, that are preventing the connection with the mass of people.
For sure. So now that we've analyzed the video for 20 minutes, let's watch the video. By the way, Vietnam has no vaccine mandate either. Similar situation where people just trusted the vaccine. They didn't create their own vaccine like Cuba.
So let me ask you about vaccines. This is an area where you and I have significant differences. And, you know, just to level with you on this, like a lot of what you say, I really respond to. I think you're a very genuine person, but the across the board, whether you want to call it vaccine skepticism or anti-vax advocacy, which has been a central part of what you've been up to for the past number of years. For me personally, it's an issue, and it's a real sort of red line. And I know I'm not alone in that, especially running in a Democratic primary. There are going to be other millions of people.
So that's one of the things that made people mad, was that she's out here supporting Marianne Williamson, who is taking the NATO line on Ukraine, who has said she supports a two-state solution in Israel, which is basically a position in support of Zionism. And Krystal Ball didn't push back on that. As you know, Marianne Williamson is a guest at her wedding, so she's, you know, a close friend of Marianne at this point. But she's willing to draw a red line over the vaccines, and she says many Democrats are as well. You know, of course, a bourgeois party, and this is, like we said, something that's being pushed from the top down in a lot of ways. So a lot of people took issue with that red line comment. Why is this a red line, but not pushing for World War III in Ukraine?
And that's something that's completely sensible to push back against, and doesn't implicate the person doing it in, you know, some form of, I guess, vaccine skepticism to like the level of RFK. Like, it's perfectly consistent to like want to vaccinate your children with the early vaccines you're supposed to get, and also make that bring that point out. I think the level of suffering that would be brought about by a nuclear World War III would be much greater than, you know, the population not getting vaccines. I mean, it's still something that's fair to bring up.
Like me, who have similar concerns. So how do you win them over? What's your message to people who think like I do?
Well, but just tell me where you think I got it wrong.
Well, I think you get it wrong when you draw a correlation between the rise of things like autism and the introduction of vaccines when there isn't hard scientific evidence tying those things together.
That was also factual inaccuracy. There is correlation. There's not causation. Right. Yeah. Science hasn't proven causation, which RFK explains in about 3 minutes here when Krystal actually lets him talk. But
to be fair, she might have just misspoke.
Yeah, I'm sure she did.
Like in your basic statistics class, day one, they tell you correlation is not causation. We had this guy at Clark that did that. Maybe she was just trying to remember the phrase and said the wrong variable, but she's still wrong about that.
Right, and she brings up a study trying to that claimed to show causation and debunks that. So clearly she meant causation hasn't been shown. But still definitely a kind of a big mix-up.
How do you know? Let me ask you this. How do you know there's not a hard scientific evidence?
Well, because the one major study that purported to show that was retracted, and the scientist who conducted it was,
Now, what you're doing now,
basically
Krystal,
fraudulently created. Listen,
no.
Hold on.
You're
But
raising this
I don't
issue.
want to get in a debate with you about this because you've spent your life pulling out this study. That I will tell you.
So that's ridiculous. Like, I know vaccines aren't your specialty, right? But you're going to have RFK on your show, and you're a journalist, you're an interviewer, and you want to raise this specific issue of vaccines. So you tell him that it's a red line to where you can't support him and ask him how he's going to win people over. But then you say, I don't want to debate the issue. I don't want to talk about the issue. Well, he's not going to win people over who don't want to talk about it, right?
Mhm.
Who would just say, I'm not voting for you, period, because we disagree on this and I won't even discuss it. Like, of course, he's not going to win those people over, which Krystal's right. That is a large portion of the Democratic Party who thinks that way, at least the Democratic Party establishment. But you have to be able to talk about this, and you can at least question the guy and give pushback on anything he says. You don't have to fully accept everything that he says. And if you're not, you don't have to be an expert to do, a decent amount of research and be like, here's where I have skepticism. Here's a claim that you've made. Here's where I'm skeptical about it. Or like Carlos said, ask him about the Cuba vaccine. So if, say if you're a 100% vaccine skeptic, what about in Cuba where they created their own COVAX vaccine, where it wasn't created by these Western pharmaceutical companies and the public institutions like the WHO, who they've largely captured. So there were a lot of things that Krystal could have done besides shut down the debate and then continue to talk over RFK.
And I saw at the interview he did in Mike Tyson's podcast, he said that he wasn't anti-vaccines. He's very much focused in the vaccines that are pushed out to the American public, that are grounded in this medical pharmaceutical industrial complex, which should be rightly criticized. And what he's questioning is their efficacy, not just at solving certain things, but their intent. Right? If you have profit as an intent, is it really in line with the logic of medical production, which is profit? Is it in line with that logic if you actually put out something that not only prevents sickness, but that solves it? Right? There's this paradox. You have in the Hippocratic Oath that the purpose of medicine is to not only cure illnesses, but to cure the conditions that led to illnesses. During the French Revolution, certain Girondist thinkers were tying sickness to poverty, and the idea was that if you could cure poverty, you can cure sickness in general. So when you have that as the purpose of medicine, the end of medicine is almost like to destroy itself, to have less medicine, because as medicine is able to cure the conditions which lead to sickness, it limits the amount of space that it has for activity, because medicine is the treatment of sicknesses. So it's almost auto-abolitional. But when you have the purpose of medicine be profit, the purpose of medicine, then it's found in its proliferation. You need more and more and more and more. And the route that more takes is always one that's very profitable. So his skepticism is that, we have these rises in different other medical issues that require more and more treatment, and that should be questioned. So even if she brings up like another country, his response could very easily be that, I'm focusing on this one and the way that things work out here. And I'm not a skeptic about these other vaccines. I'm a skeptic about the ones that are developed here under these conditions, which, at least in terms of the conditions, he's right. I don't know about the vaccines. I haven't, it's not an area of research of mine. I have a child and I'm giving him all the vaccines that they say we have to give him. So I'm not, it is.
You piece of shit.
But I think it's a critique that should be allowed to have a place in the quote unquote free market of ideas, right? Because science dies when it's kept away from debate. And he's an educated individual who's capable of reading peer-reviewed articles and understanding them. I've published in science magazines. I've read a whole ton of science articles, but I'm a philosopher. What the hell does philosophy have to do with science, especially nowadays? I think it's perfectly fine for people without science backgrounds to educate themselves through peer-reviewed journals and to make educated comments. And those comments should perhaps be given a space in public debate. And I think part of the problem is that they haven't been, and that has only fueled more and more skepticism, I think, in the mass of people. Because when you don't allow a position to be debated, or as soon as it pops up, you put the fact checkers at the bottom saying this is false. Actually, look at this, and it only breeds more skepticism, in my view. At least, I might be wrong, but that's at least my view.
For sure. I want to respond real quick to this comment. It doesn't make any sense to transfer that intent on the people practicing medicine and doing research. I think this means the intent to make profit, to create surplus value, which is the intent of healthcare companies in the U.S. and the privatized system. And if you think this, I recommend you read my Journal of American Socialist Studies article about how thoroughly the corporations and the private sector have captured the American healthcare system to the point where most of the research is funded by big pharma, and you can only get a grant for your research if you do something that they want, of course. And then the academic institutions, to their very core, have been captured by the pharmaceutical industry and a lot of the other for-profit private industries in healthcare, which is largely how we got the opioid crisis. And you can read my essay or a great scholarly article from Jonathan Marks talking about how the pharmaceutical industries spent millions and millions of dollars on marketing and creating these webs of influence to control colleges, any academic institutions, any research institutions, and make sure that they're carrying out the profit-based, surplus-based interests of the corporations, the healthcare corporations. And on top of that, I don't know if it's a majority, but a giant percentage of physicians own their own practice. So they're basically a petty bourgeois class within the healthcare system of almost like small business owners, where they own their own practice, which throws them into the market, subjects them to market forces, which of course we know forces those physicians to maximize profit, to put profit over even the health of their patients in order to outcompete competitors and remain in business. So it's not the fault of medical practitioners or people doing research, and there's still great people in the field of healthcare, especially those actually providing healthcare and doing research. But that doesn't mean they're pure or not affected by the influence of the capitalist system, the profit motive. The system has been co-opted by these private profit-driven companies at every level.
And just real quick, with the opioid issue, they proved that 68,000 doctors were basically bribed to promote the opioid medicine, which they were promised wasn't addictive, without having really any evidence. And part of the funding of those 68,000 doctors was a key factor in its prescribing. And those are all shown by peer-reviewed studies, by the way.
Tell you, I've listened to hours of interviews with you with an open mind, and I'm not persuaded. Now, maybe I'm wrong. That's possible. I'll hold it out there. People can watch. I thought Megyn Kelly did a phenomenal interview with you that went through all these claims piece by piece by piece. I really encourage people to watch that whole exchange, because we won't be able to do it justice here in the 5 minutes we have left. But there are going to be people like me who aren't persuaded and who see this as an issue. And the fact that it's been such a central part of your advocacy means I can't just sort of put it to the side and say, oh, well, I'll just ignore, this piece that's been really important to you in your life. So you're running in a Democratic primary. You have a lot of people who feel even more strongly than me, who think that, Dr. Fauci is a hero and all of these things. How are you going to persuade them? How are you going to reach them? And what is your message to them?
Well, first of all, I'm not leading with, my opinions about vaccines. What I say to people is, show me where I got it wrong. Show me where I got my science wrong. I've written books about this. I wrote a book about the link between thimerosal and autism that has, I think, 450 distilled scientific studies that confirm and validate that hypothesis, and 1,400 references. And if I got something wrong, show me where it is.
But I think people have shown you where things are wrong, but you don't want to hear it. Is because I've seen
the projection here is too strong. It's her saying that, you know, people have showed you where you're wrong. Well, show him where he's wrong then so he can discuss it. And then she says he's not open to hearing where he's wrong, but he just asked her, show me where I'm wrong. Show me where I'm open to hearing it. But she didn't have anything because it seems like she hasn't really done her research on this issue to the point that you would expect.
And then she cites another guy that responded to one of his claims, and then he says, "I did respond to him in a written form. I suggest you take a look at it." So it seems like he's keeping up with his critics. At least
he is, and sorry, just to add a little context. And Krystal said she had read all of his stuff, every interview he's done, and wasn't convinced, but she hadn't read the rebuttal that he wrote to this Breaking Points segment criticizing him. So he had rebutted her arguments. She hadn't read that, and then claims to have read all his stuff.
You know, numerous fact checks. Dr. Vinay Prasad, who we, you know, really respect on the COVID vaccine. He went through your interview with All In. He did a fact check. I mean, it's not.
And I did a fact check of Vinay, and you should read that.
I will take a look at it. But I don't think that it's fair to say nobody has ever pointed out anything that's been wrong.
Well, here's what people complain about what I say. And again, I'm not leading on this issue, so people can either take it or leave it. But if you want to, you know, what you just said about me, that I'm sort of hard-headed and stubborn and just won't give in, you're wrong about that. If somebody shows me where I'm wrong, I'm going to correct it. And, you know, we have probably the most robust fact-checking operation now in North America. I have 350 PhD scientists and MD physicians on, you know, CHD's advisory board, including until recently, Luc Montagnier, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering the HIV virus. Chris Portier, who's the head of the National Toxicity Program at NIH, formerly, probably the top toxicologist in America. And if I were saying things that were scientifically unsound, those people would not stay with us. What I would say to you is, show me where I got it wrong. Show me a study where I got wrong, and I will change my position. You know, science is fluid. It's not an embarrassment to me if there's a new scientific study that I haven't seen that comes out and says I'm wrong. That's what you're supposed to do with science. But what I'm saying to you, nobody has done that. You know, if Vinay Prasad, when he did his piece, if he showed me science that was valid, I would say I would change my position.
If we got the two of you together,
read my response.
So people were also responding positively to RFK's response there. They felt like he was rational and measured and didn't jump to getting emotional and angry with Krystal. And again, is just asking her to show him where he's wrong, which there's not much substance to analyze here, like we said, which is why people were so angry about this. Because they don't really get into the substance of Krystal's critiques. It's more just her saying the vaccine thing is a red line, and then, you know, there's a lot of interrupting going on. So, yeah, you got anything to say at this point, Carlos?
Well, I think that the paradox is that in treating it like this, even though she's very clearly not in favor of, like, he's not her candidate, and she would prefer people vote Marianne. The opposite effect is taking place, which is that he looks pretty good, pretty sensible in this interview, and her comments just don't look very backed up, and at times contradictory, and at times openly dismissive. Because if you say that something's a red line, but then we can't talk about it, you're just having a presidential candidate that you're not even giving an opportunity to see if he can be the sort of person that can be supported. You're a priori before any engagement with him, saying he's unsupportable. And I think the vast majority of the people watching this interview, at least that's this part of it, I haven't seen the rest of it, we'll be able to catch on to that.
I agree. I think that's the core of what's going on here. It's Krystal prefers Marianne. And, you know, she was attacking RFK on this issue because she sees it as a weak point with Democrats. We'll go a little bit longer here. Probably not watch the full video, but.
So you say this isn't what you're leading with, but I just have to say, as someone who, you know, is watching your candidacy closely and is aware of the advocacy you've been doing and, you know, the organization that you are involved with, it's hard for me to believe this won't be an important part of how you govern. So I think that's the most important piece for people to get, who you have to accept there are going to be people like me who just don't agree with you on this. You know, certainly understand that there are many who do think that the vaccines that we have are more beneficial than harmful, that, you know, got their kids vaccinated and are happy for that decision. So how is this going to impact the way that you govern, or does it not at all?
I mean, I'm going to govern according to, you know, what evidence-based medicine.
He pretty much just goes on to say, I'm going to govern based on science and evidence. And she says, what does that mean? And they end up basically just agreeing to disagree. And I think they say they have to go to commercial break, which a lot of people were also criticizing Krystal for, because they're like, it's a YouTube show. You could interview him as long as you wanted. So that was kind of a way to just get out of this segment. But yeah, I want to scroll through the comments here. But do you have anything else you wanted to say, Carlos, or do you want to keep going with the video?
For a YouTube show, that's a weird move. That's like us having someone on for an interview and they just go on this long rant about how Trotsky's the greatest, and we just say, hold up, we gotta go to our advertisers and do a break real quick.
We would just have to make up some commercial.
We actually act out the commercial or something. But one of the things that Tom Burwell here mentions is it's interesting. Krystal knows enough about electoral politics to know that RFK Jr. has a real chance and Marianne doesn't. And that's one of the points that was brought up by our friends over at the Revolutionary Blackout Network in one of the streams that they did, defending themselves from the criticism that was waged upon them for their critique of the fact that Marianne was invited to Krystal and Kyle's wedding. It's very clearly the sort of activity that if they were serious about Marianne's political campaign, they wouldn't be doing, because they are the sort of media that is primarily going to be boosting her. And if the candidate that they're boosting is intimately related to the media that it is being boosted through, that shows a certain level of bias and connections, which isn't very professional for people doing that sort of media to be engaged in. And if she was a real contender, that could be something very detrimental to her campaign. So, yeah, this point about them recognizing that Marianne really doesn't have a shot, and that RFK Jr. perhaps does, I think it's somewhat fair. And, you know, it questions the actual commitment to progressive change that these people that are still in the Justice Democrat sort of camp of, we just need to get enough progressives in the Democrats and they're going to change. And, you know, even if we lose, we can push Biden left. You know, they're not very serious about the things that they say that they want. Yeah.
For sure. I'm pulling up the video that Sam Dixon just sent us, by the way. Thank you, Sam, for another $5 super chat. Really appreciate the support. We'll check out that video after this, if it's a short one. But yeah, I just wanted to, because when I saw this for the first time, it was on RBN, because I watch RBN pretty consistently, and I can't say I've watched Breaking Points consistently, but I was curious as to whether or not their own audience had turned on them, whether or not their own audience was upset about this, and was interested to see today that they definitely did. As I said, they lost at least 1,000 followers, probably more since I last checked. But Krystal, you're wrong about vaccines. RFK, show me where I'm wrong. Krystal, I don't want to get into this. Then RFK, then why the fuck are you starting shit? Impressed by him being polite and patient, with Krystal cutting him off. There's no way he makes it through the Democratic machine because he's too polite and patient. Could be true for sure. And a whole lot of people, I'm trying to find some of the people who said, like, I was a Breaking Point subscriber and I unsubscribed, or I was planning on becoming a Patreon supporter and now I'm not. Basically, all of these comments here are negative. And a lot of those people are, non-Breaking Points fans just coming over because the internet loves to pile on people. And, it's one of the favorite pastimes of leftists online. But, a lot of them are their own followers who come to Krystal expecting, more journalistic integrity, and were let down. So, not to condemn the Breaking Points people forever. They've done some good work. Obviously they're liberals or social democrats, or Sagar's a conservative, and Krystal and her husband, Kyle Kalinske, are social democrats. So obviously we have deep theoretical disagreements with them and we want to call them out when they're wrong. But, hopefully Krystal hears the criticism on this and, comes back from it a better journalist. Honestly, that's what I hope comes from this. Genuinely wish that for this show. You don't have any words of encouragement for Krystal Ball?
I mean, I hope she grows, but look, we, and I mean by we, like the people that consider themselves Marxists or Marxist-Leninists, we have to understand that the standard through which we judge like social democrats cannot be the same one through which we judge Marxist-Leninists, or people who consider themselves Marxists. So I don't expect, and by this I mean I don't expect much from those spaces. I hope they grow, but their commitment to social democracy has historically proven to be one that always ends up making concessions and being compromised by capitalist imperialism, and that's just a historical and I think contextual fact. So I don't expect much from these people, but if they grow, hooray! Like we went through that social democrat stage when we were very young and we grew out of it, but it seems like the cats that have been there for the last 10, 15 years don't want to go pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, they're never going to change their core. I mean, we have the series teaching Marxism to Kyle Kalinske, and every comment section is the same. He's not going to change. He doesn't want to risk changing his audience or losing his audience. It comes back to his class position, the fact that he's, makes his income by basically just saying social democratic talking points. And he's got really no incentive to switch to a revolutionary position at this point.